Love stories often end with warmth, nostalgia, and the comfort of shared memories. But not every tale of two hearts gets that kind of ending. History has witnessed couples whose final moments were not just tragic, but chillingly unforgettable. Here, we uncover the 5 worst deaths of couples ever recorded, stories that are as haunting as they are heartbreaking.
News spread last night very quickly of the impending tragedy that was unfolding. People were just dumbstruck, and this morning our whole community here on Lower Glanmire Road is absolutely numbed by this tragic news and this tragic occurrence. And look, my heart goes out to the family of this elderly couple.
It was supposed to be a day of joy, a day when life itself felt renewed. Only hours before tragedy struck, John and Gabrielle O'Donnell were celebrating the birth of their granddaughter, little Hannah, thousands of miles away in Doha. Their son Mark, a pilot living abroad, had called to share the news, and the couple, overjoyed, had invited neighbors in for tea and cake. Laughter filled their terraced home on Lower Glanmire Road, the air buzzing with pride and excitement at the arrival of a new generation. By nightfall, that same home was engulfed in flames, and the couple who had been described as inseparable soulmates were gone. The fire broke out just after 11 p.m. on April 4th, 2024. Passers-by spotted the blaze tearing through the O'Donnells' distinctive Victorian-style house, its glazed brickwork illuminated in a hellish orange glow. Within minutes, Cork City Fire Brigade and Garda E rushed to the scene, battling an inferno so intense it forced surrounding families to evacuate. Neighbors stood outside in shock as firefighters fought desperately for more than an hour, the roar of flames drowning out the silence of disbelief. When at last responders gained access to the charred interior, their worst fears were confirmed. John, in his 80s, and Gabrielle, in her 70s, had perished. Their bodies were found close together, still side by side, even in their final moments. For the O'Donnell family, the cruel timing was almost too much to comprehend. 1 life brought into the world, and 2 taken away in the same breath of fate. At their joint funeral mass, their son Mark described them as not only soulmates but also his best friends. 4 generations of O'Donnells had lived in that house, he said, and though it now stood scarred by fire, its history and the stories of Granny Gay and Grandad John would live on through his daughter. He vowed to rebuild, to carry their legacy forward. The couple's love story stretched back to the 1970s, when John, originally from Achill Island, moved to Cork for work in the steel industry. From the moment they met, they were rarely apart. Music, GAA, and family anchored their lives, their bond so obvious that friends and relatives alike described them as each other's shadows. At the funeral, jerseys from both Cork and Mayo were laid in tribute, symbols of the 2 counties that shaped their lives, bound together by love. But for the wider community, their deaths were not only a personal loss but also a communal wound. The O'Donnell home, so familiar to anyone passing down Lower Glanmire Road, was a landmark. Now it stood gutted, its windows blackened, its walls silent. The fire, which investigators later confirmed was a tragic accident, had consumed more than just a house. It had claimed 2 people who had been pillars of their community, the kind of couple whose warmth touched everyone around them. Mark stood before mourners, his voice breaking with both grief and gratitude, thanking firefighters and Garda E for their efforts. He asked the congregation to applaud the emergency services, their work a final act of dignity in the face of devastation. The church echoed with clapping, a rare moment of light in a service otherwise heavy with sorrow. The O'Donnells died as they had lived, together, and in that heartbreaking truth lies the sharpest edge of this tragedy. They had welcomed joy into their home that very morning, their hearts full of love for a granddaughter they would never hold. Hours later, the fire stole them away. For those left behind, it is a cruel reminder of how swiftly life can turn, how joy and grief can collide in a single day, leaving a family to carry both forever. In the summer of 2005, the city of Brescia in northern Italy became the backdrop for one of the most disturbing crimes the country had ever seen. Aldo Donegani, 77, and his wife, Luisa De Leo, 61, were well known in their community. quiet retirees who lived a modest life in their villa on Via Ugolini. They had no children of their own, but were close to their nephews, even sharing the villa with one of them, Guglielmo Gatti. On the surface, life seemed ordinary, but beneath that quiet exterior lay a secret that would soon horrify the entire nation. On August 1st, a relative arrived at the couple's villa for a visit, only to be met with silence. The shutters were closed, the phone lines were dead, and there was no sign of Aldo or Luisa. The villa itself was unsettlingly pristine. Their Renault Clio was parked neatly in the garage, along with their bicycles. Inside, there were half-eaten meals still in the oven, groceries left to spoil in the fridge, and even Luisa's personal belongings untouched. It was as if the couple had vanished into thin air. Concern quickly grew, and a missing persons report was filed. Friends and neighbors couldn't understand it. Just days before, the couple had attended Mass at their local parish and spoken of upcoming plans. They had disappeared without reason, without warning. For 2 weeks, investigators chased leads. Some believed they might have gone on a sudden trip, but that theory unraveled quickly. They had only just returned from holiday and nothing in their home suggested a planned departure. Suspicion soon began to circle around their nephew, Guglielmo, who lived upstairs. A 41-year-old unemployed man, reserved and withdrawn, he told police he hadn't seen his aunt and uncle in days. He insisted he knew nothing. But neighbors whispered about strange noises coming from the villa, about lights on at odd hours, and even the sharp smell of bleach drifting from the garage. Then came the discovery that changed everything. On August 17th, in the remote forested valley of Valpesco, alpine rescue workers stumbled upon a series of garbage bags dumped deep into a ravine. Inside, they found dismembered human remains in an advanced state of decomposition. It was them, Aldo and Luisa. Their bodies had been cut apart with chilling precision, packed into bags, and abandoned like trash in the wilderness. Even more horrifying, their heads were missing. Months later, mushroom hunters in the woods near Provaglio di Seo would uncover the rest. First Aldo's head, then Luisa's, found almost a year apart, both hidden beneath layers of leaves and soil. The brutal completeness of the crime sent shivers through Italy. How could anyone do this, let alone to a frail elderly couple who posed no threat to anyone? All eyes turned to Guglielmo. A witness had seen his blue Fiat Punto racing dangerously along the Vivione Pass on the very day the couple vanished. He had looked pale, sweaty, agitated. Hotel staff recalled him arriving late at night in Val Camonica, leaving early in the morning without explanation. Forensic teams searching the villa uncovered more damning evidence. Traces of blood scrubbed away in the garage, residues in his car, and even on his shoes. It appeared that Aldo and Luisa had been drugged, killed, and then dismembered in that very garage before their remains were transported into the mountains. Despite the mountain of evidence, Guglielmo denied everything. He told investigators he was being framed, that he had nothing to do with the murders, but the courts disagreed. In 2007, he was convicted of double homicide and sentenced to life imprisonment, a verdict upheld in every appeal that followed. Even now, he proclaims his innocence, yet he has never sought a retrial. His motive remains a mystery. Some judges speculated it may have been jealousy or bitterness, resentment at his uncle and aunt's active social lives in contrast to his lonely, stagnant existence. The aftermath of the murders left a scar on Brescia. The Donegani villa, once a home filled with warmth, stood empty for years. Neighbors passed by its gates, reminded of the horror that had unfolded behind its walls. For more than a decade it fell into neglect, overgrown with weeds, a grim monument to the violence that had taken place there. Even today, the story of Aldo and Luisa is remembered not only for the brutality of their deaths, but for the unsettling questions it left behind. What truly drove their nephew to such an act of savagery? Was it resentment, a sudden break from reality, or something far darker that no one ever uncovered? The couple's final moments are almost impossible to imagine. Two retirees who should have been enjoying quiet summer days together, instead betrayed by family and subjected to one of the most gruesome crimes in modern Italian history. Their story lingers as a haunting reminder of how the greatest dangers can sometimes come from within the very walls we trust the most.
The state fire marshal's office says the older couple was found here at their home on Wilderness Acres Road in Lyman Tuesday morning.
They thought they were escaping to peace, a quiet retreat in the forests of Estonia, far away from the bustle of London and Moscow, should have been a place for Philip Townsend and his wife Mary Ann to unwind, to step away from the weight of business, travel, and responsibility. Philip, a wealthy banker who often worked in Moscow, had bought the property in the late 2000s as a rustic escape. Together, he and Mary Ann had been renovating the old barn, dreaming of turning it into something lasting for their family. But instead of being a sanctuary, it became the setting of one of the most chilling tragedies a family can endure. On a cold February morning in 2012, their bodies were discovered inside the secluded holiday home, both victims of an invisible killer, carbon monoxide. There were no screams, no struggle, no warning, just silence. A silence that would devastate their 2 teenage daughters back in Norfolk, who suddenly lost both parents in a single night. The discovery was as grim as it was haunting. A plumber, arriving to fix a burst water pipe, was the one who stumbled upon the scene. He found Philip near the generator, collapsed with an empty petrol can in hand, and Mary Ann just a few steps away at the bottom of the stairs. Investigators pieced together what had gone wrong. The couple had relied on petrol-powered generators to run the house since there was no mains electricity. Local workers had warned Philip time and again that the utility room needed to stay ventilated, the doors kept open to let the fumes escape. But that night, the doors were closed. To make matters worse, an exhaust pipe had become disconnected, possibly after being knocked loose by accident. What began as an evening of normal routine ended in an unseen cloud of deadly gas, robbing them of breath and life in minutes. Back in England, the news hit like a hammer blow. At the coroner's inquest in Norwich, relatives sat in stunned silence as the details were read out. There was no foul play, no hint of suicide, only a tragic accident that claimed 2 lives in their prime. Philip, 55, had been known as an intelligent and capable man, even holding the honorary title Baron Townsend of Rathmore. Mary Ann, 52, was remembered as warm and devoted to her family. Together, they left behind not only their estate and their unfinished home in Estonia, but most painfully, their 2 children, teenagers suddenly left orphaned. The Norfolk coroner extended sympathy to the family, praising relatives who stepped in to provide the children with a stable and loving home after the tragedy. But nothing could soften the cruel twist of fate. A home meant for rest and renewal had been transformed into a tomb. Locals in Estonia expressed shock, recalling how the Townsends, though somewhat private, had been active in renovating their property and engaging in occasional disputes with neighbors. The image of Philip's last moments, trying perhaps to refuel or adjust the generator, combined with Mary Ann's helpless final steps down the stairs, painted a heartbreaking picture of 2 lives extinguished far too soon. For those who heard the story, it wasn't just the shock of the deaths, it was the chilling thought of how quickly the very air we trust can turn lethal. Carbon monoxide is invisible, silent, odorless, and merciless. It offers no warning until it's too late. The Townsends' final moments serve as a haunting reminder of life's fragility and of how love, family, and the promise of tomorrow can vanish in an instant.
In April, a young couple visiting a guest house in the Eastern Cape was found dead in the shower. There's no apparent cause of death, and an inquest was opened.
Mari Hoon was 28. Jan Vosloo was 25. They were young, deeply in love, and just months away from beginning the next chapter of their lives together, marriage. To celebrate, they decided on a quiet weekend away at the Kliphuis Guest House, a farm retreat tucked into the mountains near Karidu in South Africa's Eastern Cape. On the morning of April 26, 2020, a friend traveling with them opened the bathroom door to a sight that would never be forgotten. Mari and Jayan lay lifeless together in the shower. No visible injuries, no signs of a struggle, just 2 young lovers gone in an instant. At first, it didn't make sense. What could possibly explain such a sudden, cruel end? When investigators arrived, they treated the case as an inquest. But as days turned into weeks, the truth began to take shape. Toxicology revealed staggering levels of carbon monoxide in their blood, over 70%. All, the couple had been poisoned silently by gas while showering, likely never realizing what was happening as the invisible fumes overcame them. Carbon monoxide is often called the silent killer. It has no smell, no taste, and no color. By the time symptoms like dizziness or confusion set in, it's often too late. For Mari and Jehan, there was no warning, no chance to escape. The heartbreak only deepened when the details emerged in court. The geyser that heated the water in their bathroom had been dangerously installed. It had no flue pipe to vent the gas. Instead of drawing the deadly fumes outside, it filled the enclosed space with poison. Worse, witnesses came forward to reveal that this was no freak accident. Other guests at the same guest house had complained before. They had felt nauseous, dizzy, even collapsed while staying there. Some reported smelling gas, yet nothing was ever fixed. The owner of the guest house, Kevin Pretorius, had been warned multiple times. He knew there was a risk. He knew people were getting sick, but he dismissed it, insisting he was an expert with gas and chose not to call professionals. In court, the magistrate made it clear this was not negligence, it was recklessness. The verdict came nearly 4 years later. For the families, it was a bittersweet moment. Justice had finally been served, but nothing could bring back the two souls whose lives had only just begun. Mari's sister described them as inseparable, saying they were like peanut butter and syrup. They met as students in Stellenbosch, fell in love quickly, and got engaged 2 years later. Their wedding was supposed to have taken place just weeks after that fateful trip. Instead of walking down the aisle, their families were left to bury them, side by side. It was just after midnight in Sneinton, Nottinghamshire, and the quiet of Whittier Road was torn apart by the crackle of flames and the thick, choking smell of smoke. Neighbors peered out into the night, confused at first until they saw it. The amber glow spreading from the front room of a small terraced house. Inside that house were Paul Cox, 51, and his partner Jennifer Batterby, 40. By the time fire crews forced their way in, it was already too late. Both had succumbed to smoke inhalation, their lives stolen not by malice, but by something as small and ordinary as a tea light candle. What began as a flickering flame of comfort had turned into a deadly inferno. Investigators later pieced it together. The tea light had slipped or tipped, its flame brushing against the arm of the sofa. In moments, the fabric caught, and the fire spread with terrifying speed. The couple likely had no chance to react. The smoke, black and toxic, filled the house long before the fire itself reached its full fury. By the time neighbors heard strange noises and saw the glow from the windows, the house was already a trap. The fire service called the blaze incredibly intense, the kind that tests even the most seasoned crews. Engines from across Nottinghamshire rushed to the scene. Hoses trained on the flames, while adjoining homes were evacuated for fear that the fire would spread down the row. For hours, firefighters fought to contain it, but the heartache came when they reached Paul and Jennifer. Both had been overcome in the very place they should have felt safest, their own living room. At the inquest, the cause was ruled accidental. No foul play, no suspicious circumstances, just a candle, a sofa, and the devastating truth of how quickly life can be extinguished. Station manager Tom Clark urged the public to remember the dangers of even the smallest flame. Always use proper holders. Keep candles away from fabrics. Never leave them unattended. Simple precautions that, if taken that night, might have spared 2 lives. For the community, the tragedy was shattering. Neighbors stood in the cold night air watching their street lit up by flames, helpless as the house they passed every day burned before their eyes. "It's frightening and really upsetting," one resident said, recalling how she heard the commotion and saw the house engulfed. "Very sad" barely begins to describe it. Paul and Jennifer's story lingers as a chilling reminder that sometimes it isn't grand disasters or violent crimes that take lives, but the smallest things we overlook. A tea light meant to bring warmth and calm became the spark of devastation, leaving behind not only a destroyed home, but a warning that danger often hides in the ordinary.
We are just distraught. This has really torn 2 families apart. Our son Lucas was having the time of his life travelling the world. He met a beautiful young lady and they teamed up. They were a great pair and they fell in love.
Lucas, a 23-year-old Australian, had grown up with an adventurous spirit. Chinna, just 24, was a bright, warm-hearted American who had an infectious smile and a fearless curiosity about the world. When they met, it felt like fate had thrown them together, and soon after, the two planned what many would call the trip of a lifetime, a road journey through the vast beauty of Canada's wilderness. They had mapped their route carefully, plotting a course through British Columbia's most breathtaking scenery. Friends said they were inseparable, the kind of couple that radiated happiness, whose love was so obvious it lifted everyone around them. On July 14, 2019, their old blue 1986 Chevrolet van broke down near Layard Hot Springs, a remote but stunning stretch of road on the Alaska Highway. A passing mechanic, Curtis Broughton, and his wife stopped to check if they needed help. To their relief, the young couple seemed cheerful, even unfazed by the breakdown. Lucas and Chinna were smiling, sharing a picnic on the roadside, waiting for the van's engine to cool. They seemed like they had it under control, Broughton later recalled. It looked like nothing more than a small hiccup on a great adventure. Hours later, everything changed. The following morning, July 15th, a highway worker stumbled upon a sight that would send shockwaves across 2 continents. Lucas and Chinna's bodies were found in a ditch just a few meters from their van. Both had been shot multiple times. Their joyful road trip had ended in unimaginable violence. The van's windows were smashed, the back doors left open, as if frozen in the middle of chaos. Their bodies lay only 5 meters apart, their heads turned west, stripped of the futures they had once talked about so eagerly. News of the murders spread quickly, devastating their families. Chinna's mother, Sheila, described her daughter as full of life, someone who wanted to see the world and share it with Lucas. For Lucas's father, Stephen Fowler, the grief was unthinkable. He described Lucas and Chinna as beautiful souls, whose love was obvious to anyone who met them. For days, the investigation offered more questions than answers. Witnesses reported seeing the couple the previous afternoon. Others recalled passing a van, but no one had seen what happened in those crucial hours. Soon, another crime scene emerged, a burnt-out truck hundreds of kilometers away, and later, the body of a university professor found murdered under similar circumstances. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police realized they were dealing with something bigger, a killing spree that stretched across provinces. By July 22nd, 2 teenagers, Cam McLeod, 19, and Briar Schmigelski, 18, were named as suspects. At first, they had been reported as missing, but evidence tied them directly to the murders. What followed was one of the largest manhunts in modern Canadian history. Over 10 days, the teens evaded capture, traveling more than 3,200 kilometers across 4 provinces. The pursuit gripped the nation. Communities from British Columbia to Manitoba locked their doors, while armed officers patrolled highways, forests, and even remote Indigenous communities. A sense of unease settled over the country. If these boys could kill a couple like Lucas and Chinna with no warning, who else was safe? Sightings poured in from different towns. A store's surveillance camera caught them on video. 2 young men buying supplies as if nothing had happened. In another town, locals unknowingly helped them when their vehicle got stuck. The realization that Canada's most wanted fugitives had been in their communities left people rattled. By late July, the hunt narrowed to the dense, swampy wilderness near Gillam, Manitoba, a landscape described as unforgiving, full of biting insects, bogs, and predators. The search dragged on, but on August 7th, the RCMP announced that the fugitives' bodies had been found near the Nelson River. They had taken their own lives with the same guns they had used to kill Lucas and Chinna. Investigators recovered chilling video recordings the 2 teens left behind. In those clips, they admitted to the murders but offered no motive, no explanation, no sign of remorse. They died as enigmatically as they had lived, leaving behind only devastation.
Police are investigating after 3 people, 2 of them from Alabama, were found dead inside a Panama City Beach hotel room over the weekend.
The DoubleTree by Hilton Majestic Hotel in Harrogate was meant to be a place of luxury, a retreat away from the noise of life. For 29-year-old Shanice Gregory and her partner, Michael McGibbon, it became the stage of a nightmare no one could have imagined. When staff discovered their bodies inside a hotel room in May 2021, the scene was almost too horrific to process. Both had suffered fatal stab wounds. The truth was even darker than the discovery itself. Investigators determined it was a murder-suicide. Shanice had been stabbed 22 times, and then McGibbon turned the knife on himself. 2 young lives ended in the most intimate yet brutal way possible, behind the locked door of a hotel room. For Shanice's family, it was more than tragedy. It was betrayal, because this wasn't just an act of sudden violence. It was a story of years of control, warning signs, and systemic failures that had all but paved the way to her death. Shanice grew up in Brixton, the youngest of 4 siblings. She was described as friendly, active, and caring, a young woman with a bright smile and a love for baking. She worked as a nursery assistant, devoting herself to children and others around her. But in 2013, she met McGibbon, and everything began to change. At first, it seemed like love. Yet soon, people close to her noticed her once vibrant personality start to fade. McGibbon was domineering, manipulative, and increasingly controlling. He wasn't just any man with a temper. He was a convicted rapist, jailed in 2016 for assaulting a stranger. Prison and probation services knew he was dangerous. They even suspected that Shanice was particularly vulnerable under his influence. And yet, the system that was supposed to protect people like her kept failing, again and again. When McGibbon was released in 2019, agencies knew he was storing knives in his bedroom. They recalled him temporarily, but oversight and mismanagement soon saw him downgraded and released again in 2020. Back into the world and back into Shanice's life. The red flags grew louder. Just days before the murder, McGibbon phoned police claiming people were threatening to kill him. Officers found knives strategically placed around his bed. Yet, instead of treating this as a crisis, they hid the weapons and walked away. They barely spoke to Shanice, not even asking her name, not questioning the obvious risk she faced. A crucial intelligence report that could have triggered his return to prison was misfiled and sent to the wrong team. By the time the mistake was realized, it was too late. On the night of May 4th, 2021, in the quiet privacy of a hotel room, all the warnings finally came to their inevitable end. Shanice, trapped in the cycle of McGibbon's control, never stood a chance. 22 stab wounds ended her life, and then McGibbon inflicted the final wound on himself. For the police, it was another case closed. For her family, it was a wound that would never heal. Her sister Shireen still remembers her as the girl with the contagious smile and curly hair, her baby sister who was also her best friend. She spoke at the inquest, her voice breaking between grief and anger. Shanice wasn't just a statistic or a case file lost between departments. She was a daughter, a sister, a woman who had so much left to give. The jury would later conclude that systemic failures had played a role, that but for the communication breakdowns, the oversight, and the lack of action, Shanice might still be alive. It was confirmation of what her family already knew. She had been let down, not just by McGibbon, but by the very bodies meant to keep dangerous offenders from striking again. The haunting part of this tragedy is not only how it ended, but how preventable it might have been. A missed report here, a neglected warning there, and the chain of failures became the silent accomplice in her murder. For Shanice's family, the pain is permanent. As her sister put it, all they have left now are memories. A story that should have been of resilience and love, but instead became one of violence and loss.
Brand new reporting on the 2 people who were found dead inside a home. Mobile police now believe the couple died from carbon monoxide poisoning.
Jonathan and Deborah Coster thought of their home in Yate as their safe haven. It was where they shared their quiet routines, their laughter, and their life together. But behind the familiar walls of that house, an invisible danger had been building for years, one they could neither see nor smell. When neighbors noticed something was wrong one November morning, emergency services rushed to the scene. Inside, they discovered the couple lifeless, side by side, victims of a silent killer that had crept into their home without warning, carbon monoxide. The investigation revealed a grim truth. Their old coal-fired boiler, more than 40 years in service, had not been maintained in over a decade. 4 of its internal flues were completely blocked, sealing their fate. When tested, the appliance was found to be releasing 1,368 parts per million of carbon monoxide into the air. To put that into perspective, levels as low as 35 parts per million can trigger alarms, and anything above 500 can kill. For Jonathan and Deborah, it was a death sentence delivered quietly, over the course of just 2 hours. At first, police wondered if something more sinister had happened. Jonathan was found with an injury to his head, and detectives briefly treated the case as suspicious. But soon, the truth became clear. There was no foul play, no deliberate harm, just a tragic accident. A home meant to keep them safe had betrayed them, and the very appliance they trusted to provide warmth had turned into an executioner. The coroner's inquest painted a devastating picture. Food sat uneaten, belongings untouched. Nothing to suggest the couple had sensed what was happening. There had been no chance to escape. A simple act of maintenance, an annual servicing, a carbon monoxide detector, the smallest precaution, could have saved their lives. Instead, neglect had left the boiler to slowly choke the home with lethal gas until the air itself became poison. The Costers' deaths were not just another statistic. They were a reminder of how fragile the line between safety and danger really is. Their story forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. The dangers most likely to claim us are often the ones we overlook, hidden in plain sight. The silence that filled their home that night is haunting because it could happen anywhere, to anyone. And that is what makes their ending so devastating. 2 lives lost, not to malice or violence, but to something as preventable as a blocked boiler and a moment's neglect. In the quiet village of Gakuranta in Limpopo, South Africa, the kind of horror you'd expect only in nightmares unfolded inside the home of an elderly couple. Neighbors had grown worried when the lights stayed on unusually late, and by the time police arrived, the scene inside was nothing short of chilling. An 83-year-old man was found first, seated on the floor, his neck bound with a rope, tied cruelly to the ceiling above him. Just steps away, in another room, his 80-year-old partner lay lifeless on her back, the same fate inflicted upon her. 2 people who had spent decades together in love and companionship, now separated in death by walls that once kept them safe. There were no screams heard, no signs of forced entry shouted about by neighbors, just silence, and the eerie discovery of ropes that told the story of cruelty beyond comprehension. They bore no visible injuries, no bloodied evidence of a struggle, only the sinister handiwork of someone who had invaded their home and robbed them not just of their belongings but of their dignity. Their cell phones were gone, as if their final moments had been reduced to nothing more than an opportunity for theft. Police confirmed what their family already feared. The victims were Mafatola Selaelo Rasodi and Malekutu Alfred Mokupi, 2 elders who should have been spending their twilight years in peace. Instead, they became targets, bound, strangled, and discarded by hands that showed no mercy for age, no reverence for the love and trust that filled the walls of their home. What makes this story cut even deeper is the thought of their final minutes. 2 people in their 80s, likely powerless to fight back, staring at the ropes around their necks, possibly hearing each other's muffled cries from separate rooms but unable to help. The terror of knowing the person you love most in the world is just a door away, suffering the same fate, is something almost too painful to imagine. Investigators have opened a case of double murder and house robbery, but for the people of Gakuranta, the crime feels far more personal. It is not just about cell phones stolen or suspects still at large. It is about the violation of life itself, of elders who should have been cherished, taken from their community in the most brutal way possible. The cruelty of the act, the coldness in which they were left behind, hangs over the village like a shadow. And for us hearing their story, it is a harsh reminder that safety is never guaranteed, not even within the 4 walls we call home. Love carried them through decades, but in the end, it could not protect them from the hands of violence. Their deaths ask us an unsettling question. How could anyone look at 2 lives so fragile, so precious, and show such monstrous disregard? The fire came fast, too fast for anyone to believe. In the quiet hills of Napa Valley, where the vineyards stretched endlessly under the California sun, a century-long love story came to its final, heartbreaking chapter. Charles "Peach" Rippey, who had just celebrated his 100th birthday, and his wife Sarah, 99, had spent more than 75 years side by side. But on that October night when wildfires ripped through Northern California with winds reaching 50 miles per hour, the couple who had shared everything in life found themselves trapped in the one place that had always been their sanctuary, their home. The flames tore down the mountainside, devouring neighborhoods in minutes. Firefighters said the blaze moved so quickly and with such ferocity that the elderly never stood a chance. Sarah, weakened by a stroke, could no longer move without her wheelchair. Charles, despite his age, tried to reach her. Their son, Mike, later revealed the haunting detail. His father's body was found in the hallway, facing the direction of her room. He had been trying to save her, refusing to leave without her. He never made it. Their granddaughter, Ruby, put it into words that cut straight to the heart. The only thing worse would have been if one survived without the other. This wasn't just the destruction of a house. It was the end of a love story that had begun in the small towns of Wisconsin, where Charles and Sarah met as children, went to college together, and grew into a life defined by loyalty, family, and unshakable devotion. They had 5 children, countless grandchildren, and a marriage that outlasted wars, depressions, and the endless turns of history. And yet, in the end, it was fire, sudden, merciless fire, that stole them both in a single night. Neighbors described the flames as walls of orange racing through vineyards and retirement homes, leveling communities in less than 2 hours. Survivors stood in disbelief at the smoldering ruins, sifting through ash where homes and memories once stood. Among the rubble of the Rippeys' home, broken china and scorched furniture told the story of a life once filled with joy and routine. For Mike and his siblings, the grief came with an odd kind of comfort. They knew their parents could not have lived without one another. "We often talked about it," Mike said quietly, about how either of them would cope if the other went first. Neither of them could. And so, when the fire came, they went together, bound by the same devotion that had carried them through nearly a century. Their deaths were a tragedy, yes, but also a final act of love. Charles refused to leave Sarah, and in those last desperate moments, even as fire swallowed everything, he stayed true to the promise he had kept for more than 75 years, that they would face the world together until the very end.